The Jak and Daxter series is an oddity in the gaming industry. When a new IP finds success, we almost never see drastic change with the next game. Sure, they'll expand upon ideas, address any criticisms the original game had, but at the game's core, it should ensure returning fans feel at home with a sequel. Jak and Daxter didn't do that. Jak 2 was a drastic change to the original game's formula, something I had no clue about when I first played the game, because this was my introduction to the series. It was only after I'd played Jak 2, 3, and X that I went back and played the precursor legacy, and noticed how drastically the series had changed from its beginning. And whilst Jak 2 was my introduction to the series, it is one I don't really remember anything about, except for Dark Jak and the addition of guns. I don't have fond or negative memories about the game, just that I remember playing it, so after playing through the precursor legacy again a couple of weeks ago, I was really excited to jump into the rest of the series, and now here we are to continue this series of retrospectives. Today I'll be going over Jak 2's development, story, and gameplay, and see how the game, almost 17 years later, holds up today. As always, timecodes will be in the description below for your convenience. Naughty Dog stated before the release of Jak and Daxter, the precursor legacy, that they had plans on developing a new game for the series and would act on these plans if people enjoyed the characters they created. Keyword in that statement being characters, and with the success critically and commercially for the game, they began work on Jak 2 shortly before the release of Jak and Daxter in 2001. Early on in development, Naughty Dog had realised 3D platformers were falling out of favour with the masses, and really changed their own perceptions of the gaming industry, with a focus group within Naughty Dog during Jak 2's development releasing their findings that many gamers, even as young as 8 years old, preferred playing more mature titles. These findings left the studio to question continuing the series at all, but Sony ended up persuading the team to continue the series due to their love for the characters, and Naughty Dog compromised by focusing on making this world and characters more mature. This time round, instead of finding inspiration in Mario 64, Zelda, and Spyro, the team looked to the recently released Grand Theft Auto 3, as most of the team really enjoyed the title, and because of this and their recent findings, the game acted as a huge inspiration during Jak 2's development, and it shows with the addition of a gun, a city landscape, people inhabiting this world, and driving or hovering around. However, these changes were sparked from the ambition Naughty Dog had for Jak 2's story, upping the frequencies in cutscenes to expand upon the world more and help the darker, more mature tone of the characters to not feel so jarring to fans of the original game. The changes to the series' storytelling and game settings meant Naughty Dog needed to place a greater emphasis on the development of the characters and world building, such as having less characters we talk to in Jak 2, but they all have varying amounts of depth of their own. Whilst Jak 2 largely reuses a lot of the original game's technology, Jak 2 looks much crisper, and that is because Insomniac Games provided Naughty Dog with a polygon occlusion code that they had used for Ratchet & Clank, which was a game actually based on Naughty Dog's engine, but was much more efficient and allowed Naughty Dog to up Jak 2's polygon count from 3,000 to almost 15,000. After 2 years of development, Jak 2 released in October 2003, and whilst it was a drastic change in direction from the original Jak and Daxter, went on to garner critical and commercial acclaim yet again. But the question is, how does the game hold up today? The story for Jak 2 has a lot more going on than in the precursor legacy. Whilst the original game set up the intrigue and potential for further expansion, Naughty Dog really stepped up the intrigue in this universe in Jak 2. The story begins sometime after the events of the first game, with another speech from Samos. Jack, Daxter, Samos, and Kira are getting ready to activate the Rift Rider, the precursor device they found behind the precursor door in the first game, and a rift gate. Once they activate the rift gate though, a large monster-like creature appears along with swarms of other creatures, and in a panic, Jack activates the Rift Rider and the team goes through the gate to escape. Whilst going through the rift, the rider ends up being destroyed and the group fall out of the rift, separated but all in the new location of Haven City. Once Jack and Daxter land though, they are immediately surrounded by a group known as the Crimson Guard, and Jack is arrested and they chase away Daxter as he leaves us with a promise to save us soon, as the screen goes to black and the story resumes 2 years later. I don't know what soon means to an Otzel, but it seems a little long. I wonder what he was doing. We resume the story and Jack is in the Baron's fortress, where Baron Praxis has been attempting to turn Jack into something of a super soldier by infusing him with dark eco. Unfortunately for the Baron, he deems this Dark Warrior program a failure, and they leave just as Daxter appears to rescue Jack. But he didn't really need it, as we get our first look at Dark Jack as he breaks free from his restraints before returning back to normal and finally speaks his first words.
Say something! Just this once! I'm gonna kill Praxis!
Seriously, those are Jack's first words in this series. They really wanted to say this game is darker, right from the get-go. Also, it's a little weird that after 2 years in captivity, Jack only has a soul patch. Like, did the Baron make him grow that, or does Jack just have bad beard genetics? I don't know. Anyway, the duo end up escaping the fortress and head into Haven City, when they are immediately met by an old man named Core and a child who gets no name. Wonder why that is. Core tells us to seek out the Shadow, the leader of the Underground, a resistance group within Haven City. Instead, we meet Torn, the Shadow's lieutenant and ex-Crimson Guard, where we learn about the Baron's war with an evil, biomechanical race of creatures that date back to the precursor times known as the Metalheads, which, when we infiltrate the Baron's palace, learned that this was actually an act, and the Baron and the Crimson Guards were gathering eco for the Metalheads in exchange for attacking the city just enough to keep himself in power. So this war was just to distract the public, except the deal has gone sour, and the Metalheads are legitimately trying to overrun Haven City. Anyway, Torn won't let us see the Shadow until we prove our loyalty to the Underground. And it's from this point the story can be a little messy in retelling, so I'll try and go over the big points. And probably the biggest is when we find Samos's hut in the ruins of Haven City, meaning we are in Sandover Village. We are just 500 years into the future. I bring this up because even though we are in the future, we learn that the Shadow is actually a young Samos, which will make sense by the end, and also managed to stumble across both Kira and old Samos, or original Samos, and now the gang is back together. Kira has been working on recreating the Rift Rider in hopes of returning home, but the Baron's plans to destroy the Metalheads threatens to destroy Haven City in the process, and Jack feels the need to stay and help. The Baron has obtained the Precursor Stone, a large gem that contains the essence of the last living Precursor, and intends to weaponize the stone to destroy the Metalhead nest, which will destroy the city along with it. The city begins to fall from a Metalhead invasion when we intercept the Baron confronting Core, the old man, who reveals himself to be the true leader of the Metalheads, and the creature that was responsible for Jack and his crew coming to Haven City in the first place. The Baron attempts to kill Core, but instead dies himself, and entrusts Jack with the Precursor Stone so he can save the city. After infiltrating the Metalhead's nest is where the pieces of this puzzle begin to fall into place. Core is responsible for bringing us to Haven City so that Jack could be mutated with the Dark Eco, as the Precursor Stone otherwise would have given Jack the power to destroy Core, and the kid from the beginning turns out to be young Jack.
What the fuck?
and we discover Jack was sent back 500 years to Sandover Village so he would be protected from the metalheads until the time came where he could challenge Core's power with the stone. As young Jack is untouched by Dark Eco, he is the key to unlocking the stone's energy. But Jack and Daxter manage to behead Core with the Rift Gate, effectively neutralizing the remaining metalheads. Young Jack releases the stone's entity, which allows young Jack and young Samos to travel back to Sandover Village to continue the timeline of events. Yes, the Rift Rider we found in the beginning of the game is the Rift Rider we created 500 years later, and the game leaves us with Jack, Daxter, Samos and Kira prepared to live the rest of their lives here in Haven City, with the game fading to black amongst the fireworks for a job well done. That's the main storyline of Jak 2, and I have to say, what a journey. What makes the story so engaging and hold up so well is Jak 2's cutscenes. They still look great today, and the animation of the characters' faces make what they are conveying and saying much more enjoyable to watch. I think the best moments in the story are related to Core and the kid, well, young Jak. And that's because we know something's up with them very early on, but where the story ends up taking them is where the game still manages to make their twists work. Core gives you an inkling that he may not be on the level, but I didn't expect him to be the metalhead leader in disguise. And from the start, you can tell this kid is supposed to be Jak, especially after seeing the two Samoses, but to learn Jak is originally from Haven City and was sent back 500 years to stay hidden was again a great twist that you see parts of coming, but still surprises you. You may have noticed I didn't really talk about some pretty big characters in the game, and that's because they aren't all that important to the main story, but that doesn't mean they are any less great or important to the world building and setting up lore. We have Crew, the obese crime lord who clearly has his own motives for helping the underground, but is a massive source of intrigue and learning about the underbelly of the city. Ashlyn, the Baron's daughter and high-ranking member of the Crimson Guard, yet works for the Underground and is our source of learning about the Baron's plans, and she acts as another love interest for Jak with conflicting emotions when he reconnects with Kira. Pekka, a Monkor, hybrid between a monkey and a macaw, translates for the mute Onin sign language, and amongst being another source for lore and world building, Pekka and Onin's relationship is a lot like Jak and Daxter's from the first game, and Pekka has that same charm as Daxter, so he's just a fun character to be around. Even smaller characters like Sig, Crew's bodyguard, start off seeming like nothing characters, but evolve into people you enjoy seeing. The weakest character here would probably be Torn. He is so important for those first few hours, and then once the shadow arrives, sort of vanishes. I would have liked to have seen more from him here. Obviously, the story is much more serious this time round, but luckily the humour of this series remains, because there is nothing wrong with a more serious story, but it wouldn't have suited this series to be that way all the time. The biggest praise I can give for the game's story is it makes some of my complaints I'll get into with the gameplay feel worth it. I truly wanted to see how this story wrapped up, where it was going, and how we were going to get there. It's engaging. The characters are morally grey at times, and it leaves more room for expansion on this series' world. I loved my time with the story, and it really was a reward at the end of the gameplay. It's just unfortunate that the gameplay is not all positives. The gameplay of Jak 2 is a tricky thing for me to talk about, so I want to get this out of the way in the beginning. I liked playing through the game. Didn't love it, but I did like it. I wanted to get this out of the way because Jak 2 can be a frustrating game, and I will be talking about my frustrations with the gameplay loop. So when I am hating on the game, just remember what I said here. Okay, let's talk about the changes to gameplay, and then I'll talk about what I liked and didn't like. The biggest change made was the game's inclusion of a gun. Instead of spinning and punching, we now have that along with a morph gun, which changes between a shotgun, rifle, machine gun, and a grenade launcher. Instead of the original game's eco-based power-ups, we now have Dark Jack, who learns more moves gradually throughout the game by collecting Metalhead gems. But while using Dark Jack, we cannot use our morph gun and have to be melee only, which does get a buff. Haven City is the game's hub, and most of what you'll be doing are right here in the city. But the city has a variety of locales in and outside of it, and this is a large world to explore, which meant more focus on driving or hovering here in Jak 2 with cars, motorcycles, and Jak's new jetboard. That's just what has changed, so time to talk about what I actually think about the game. Jak 2 is a challenging game at times, and not always for the best, so I hope you get used to seeing this screen. What makes Jak 2 a lot more challenging than the original game is with the addition of the morph gun, we have a lot more enemy variety in the game. Gone are the days of one-hitting most enemies, and the enemy count has been significantly increased, sometimes to a ridiculous level. Now, the enemies themselves are not my source of frustration because I love the variety and the challenge they presented. What I don't like is the game's lack of checkpoints. Obviously, games like early GTA entries made you replay entire missions if you failed, but Jak 2 has checkpoints. They just aren't often enough in a lot of cases. So when you die from, say, your jetboard not attaching to a grind rail for no reason at the end of a level, yeah, it feels a little unfair. The saving grace of this system is the levels are short enough, so what the game asks of you is to get through the level without dying. Where this system becomes tedious is perfectly represented in the turret mission, where we destroy metalhead eggs. Whilst your progress saves in terms of the eggs you destroyed, if you die, you have to start from the start and make your way back to where you were last, and if this happens a couple of times, it just sucks all the fun out of the mission, if the mission had any fun to begin with. I think it's also important to know that I am playing the PS4 versions of these games, and whilst I haven't been experiencing the same issues as many are having with frame rate drops and alike in terms of performance, the final boss was one I had to cheese because the animation for his AoE attack is glitched, and I forgot it was a ground attack, so I didn't know what I was dodging, so I just beat him like this. Really, that is my only frustrations with the gameplay though, but in the moment it can feel like absolutely everything. That's why I beat the game early in the week and let myself sit and think about the game before writing this video, because upon reflection, the game has a lot of cool ideas that really are fun to play. Jak 2's strongest claim to greatness is the game's vast amount of variety. There are so many quality missions, and rarely does it ever feel like you are doing the same mission more than a couple of times, other than the races, but the track and challenge changes enough to feel fresh. And there are obviously my personal favourites that really made for a good time. No mission gave me a bigger smile than when Daxter channeled his inner Crash Bandicoot and we get a classic running away mission. And yes, in Jak 2 we get to, from time to time, play as Daxter. Smile from ear to ear, this was great. The game feels good to play when it works, and you can go from mission to mission with constant changes like destroying Crimson Guard prison cars to free lurkers, they're good in this game, and take them to safety, completing races, hunting metalheads, controlling a mech underwater, avoiding squid-like metalheads and mines, using your jetboard to lower the water in the sewer, definitely not just water, destroy spider-like Crimson Guard vehicles about to get to the underground, finding precursor artifacts, button-based minigames, the list seriously goes on. The missions work so well, for the most part, because the gameplay loop of driving from A to B is an art and it feels good to perfect. The gunplay and challenge of the enemies means you are constantly on edge in a good way, and gathering Dark Eco to use Dark Jak and knowing when to use it is a choice you don't take lightly, in case you may need it later on, and the power up has its pros and cons to it. Will you just focus on meleeing enemies for longer, or maybe using a big AoE to instantly take out enemies nearby, but knowing you aren't invincible in this mode until you get the upgrade? If I was to criticize anything, it would really be there's no point in collecting the precursor orbs. You unlock cheats and special features, but you don't buy anything with them or anything, so it just left me not bothering, even though some of the cheats are fun for a few seconds. And if I was to nitpick, the world's inhabitants just walk around. They aren't working or anything, just there to make the world feel populated. But on the whole, as I said in the beginning, I really liked my time playing Jak 2. It's not perfect and has its share of frustrations that haven't aged well, but when the game works, it is hard to fault. And for such a big change, Naughty Dog's ideas can only grow and improve from here. This retrospective was a weird one for me because I didn't know what to expect here in Jak 2. But what I ended up getting was a great time. Yes, the game can have its frustrating moments, yet the story is intriguing and interesting. The twists managed to hit despite seeing something coming a mile away. The characters are fleshed out, and the gameplay loop, when it works, is a true achievement for the amount of change between games. So is Jak 2 worth playing in 2020? On the whole, I say yes. It holds up really well for the most part, and if you want to experience the series story, Jak 2 does a great job at adding upon the lore of Jak and Daxter and improves in so many ways from the original. Just know it isn't without its flaws, and you may hate the game at times, but when it is all said and done, you will look back on your playthrough with fond memories, and that is a sign the game did something great.